Hello and welcome to the show today. We've got a great number of guests today, Brian Calley and Rob Fowler from the Small Business Association of Michigan. We also have Leon Lebrecht, a regular contributor to Forbes magazine, just published an article about the CARES Act hidden stimulus. We're talking about $300 billion projected in hidden money for business owners. I'm Lisa Ellen Smith, and this is Focus on Business. Hello, and welcome once again, Brian Calley and Rob Fowler from the Small Business Association of Michigan. We also have a very special guest today, Leon Lebrecht. He is the Chief Growth Officer for Sequoia Financial Group, and we're very glad for you all to be here today. Leon, I wanted to start the show with you. You write regularly for Forbes magazine. I feel very fortunate to have you on the show today. Just recently have written something that has been published there. Let me just quickly say though, you're quite a unicorn, a special, very smart guy. And so you have a law degree, you are a certified public accountant, certified financial planner, certified financial analyst, basically a guy that you most certainly want to have on your team if you're thinking about legal and financial issues. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I had heard you do an interview about the CARES Act. The CARES Act is something we talked a lot on this show about. It's about the response to the COVID crisis. And of course, we've talked a lot about the Paycheck Protection Program loans that many of us have gotten. But there's a lot more to the CARES Act than that if you're willing to invest a little bit of time. I understand that you believe that there's some hidden things, some stimulus money in there that could be nearly as impactful as the Paycheck Protection Program loans for some businesses. So I will let you take it from there.
Thanks, Lisa. And I do call it the hidden stimulus because as a CPA, of course, and as an attorney, I sat and read the darn CARES Act. First thing I did as soon as it came out, all 887 pages of it, I said, boy, I'm really crazy. But as I got through certain of the things, they repealed a couple sections of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that really have a profound effect on businesses. In fact, just this morning, I was talking to a CPA literally out of LA for a client of mine who had a net operating loss in 2019. And what is now happening is if you had a loss, you can take it back as opposed to just carry it forward. See, the law before, Lisa, was if you had a net operating loss, you could only carry 80% of it forward and you could only carry it forward. Well, what good was that going to do if you really had a terrible year in 2020? You might not get the benefit until 2021 or 2022 or whatever. That was put into the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Well, CARES took that out and said, not only can you carry it back, you can carry it back 5 years. And not only can you carry back 2020, but you can carry back 2019 and 2018. In fact, all our viewers ought to know that they should go look at their 2018 return right now because you could go all the way back to 2013. What's really interesting about this, Lisa, is it gives you some great tax arbitrage opportunities. So for example, in 2017 and before, the maximum corporate tax rate was 35%. It's 21% now. You get more money back than you would have paid going forward. The maximum tax rate for a pass-through owner, 39.5%. That's cheap. That's a higher rate than now. You get a bigger refund than you could possibly get going forward. So it's really interesting and it's really important to go look at this net operating loss possibility. What's even more important is for 2020, you can get the 2020 losses and carry those back 5 years as well. But this whole thing's got a milk carton approach. There's an expiration date. It goes away at the end of 2020. And in fact, the 2018 opportunity goes away the end of this month. You've got to take advantage of that pretty quick. So this is one where you call up your CPA and say, look, can I use the net? Can I use a carryback? Did I have a loss in 2018? Can I use it as a carryback? The wild thing is, compared to the PPP, this is the easiest thing in the world. You can file a Form 1045 if you're an individual. It's a one-page form. You can even fax it in. You can do 1139 if you're a corporation. You can fax it in. They've set up special fax lines to take it. And I was looking at what the Treasury assumed. The Treasury assumed between this and something called the excess loss limitation rules is right around $300 billion. That's right around the first round of PPP. Here's something that was almost as big as PPP, almost easier to get, and no one's paying attention to it. So it's pretty wild. There's one more thing that makes it even more interesting. They fixed a piece of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. They fixed something in there called qualified improvement property. When Congress wrote the bill, they put a special provision in on depreciation. And guess what? They forgot to put a code section in. So we've all been sitting around going, what does this mean? But Lisa, let's suppose you have a building and your building has got HVAC in it. It's got air conditioning in it, and it's got plumbing, and it's got all these other things. Your CPA has been correctly probably depreciating your building over 39 years. But now they can go and even go back to 2019 and take full expensing for all of those things, all those segregated costs. Even like in your parking lot, we can segregate out your outlet plugs. We can segregate out your drainage pipes, and we can write those things off immediately. And guess what that does? It builds up your net operating loss. And guess what that does? Get you a refund. So there's money sitting in your parking lot right now. There's dollar bills sitting in your parking lot. There's money sitting in your sink right now if you go do it. So we're looking at it as CPAs, and I'm a director on the Michigan Association of CPAs. So my colleagues at the CPA Association are all saying, hey, this is really big deal. And of course, we're all complaining because we had to learn PPP, and now we have to learn the new NOL rules, and now we have to learn everything else, and we have to work from home, and we don't get to take any time off in the summer because usually after April 15th, we're not busy, and now we've got a July 15th, tax return day. But this is huge for members. If you own a business, lots of things to look at. Look at cost segregation, look at NOL, and look at your NOL for this year. And an interesting last point, and I'll get off because I'm a nerd, so I love talking about this stuff. My client for today is going to have a big loss. He's a lawyer, and he's going to have a big loss. And I was talking with his CPA, and she and I said, she said, what are you going to do with this loss? I said, I'm going to convert his entire 401k to a Roth. And she goes, oh my God, that's brilliant. Because he's going to be able to not pay any taxes on about a $500,000 Roth conversion because he's going to use his net operating loss to offset it. It's really cool. So this is a weird time to be a CPA. It's a real busy time to be a CPA.
So that's a lot of complicated language for a humble business owner like me. Can I just try to make this bridge?
Yeah.
If I didn't have a loss, I could go back and with special depreciation, find a loss that I could then go back and take. Is that correct?
Yes, you could potentially find a loss all the way back and use it even though you didn't have one before if you owned a building. It's basically all this segregation works is in a building. So you, like a lot of business owners like me, probably do have some business real estate. So it's pretty cool if you've got some business real estate.
Yeah, I don't happen to have a loss, so that's really interesting. And I want to just boil this down one more time.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to take advantage of this and you're a humble business owner like me, you either open up your taxes and see if there was a negative anytime between 18, 19, and 20.
Yep.
And you call your CPA and say, I want to carry back my losses.
Well, no, you call your CPA and say, I want to see if it makes sense, because you can do one more thing. You can tell the IRS, I either want to carry them back or I'll carry them forward. So I know this is going to be a real surprise to you, but there's a presidential election this year. And there's a possibility that somebody with 5 letters will be elected to the presidency. But we just don't know which 5 letters. So 5 letters in their last name. So we'll take there'll be a 5-letter last name elected to the presidency, but I don't know which one. One of them has a significant tax increase in their tax proposal. And one of them has a tax increase that's pretty big. And you might say, just in case, one of the other 5 letters comes into play, I might want to hold off on my, let's say you didn't have a loss in 2018. If I were your CPA, at least I'd say, let's get ready, but let's wait and see after November 5th, who's going to be the president, who's going to be in the Senate, because that will make a big difference whether I want you to carry it back, carry it forward. Pretty wild. It's complicated enough. Just when the PPP hasn't driven you into insanity, I come back and throw net operating losses at you. And it's all 3 letters: PPP, NOL, QIP. It's like, I'd settle for some good 4-letter words. They'd be easier to remember.
Just not 5 letters, right?
Yeah, just not 5. Anyway, this is a great conversation. I did publish I published in Forbes. So if you want to, if some of our viewers want to take a moment and go read that, they might want to go look on Forbes.com.
Sorry about that. I'm sure that Forbes would like for you to buy the the paper, but we're taping this on a Thursday. Hopefully we can get this link up so that you can link to the article as well. This is really important information. And your assessment is this could be up to $300 billion in stimulus for business owners.
Yes, that's what I think. That's not my estimate. That's Congressional Budget Office estimate. So that's Joint Tax Committee's estimate. That's the numbers from Congress. I think it could be even bigger because I think guys who are smart CPAs will manipulate the loss and make it even bigger. They'll do more cost segregation. They'll push the loss into 2020 even as big as they can make it so they can carry it back.
Well, I think that you're probably going to be educating a lot of CPAs as well on this because many of them may not have read the 800-page CARES Act. I don't know. Maybe not, but I understand you do a lot of reading, a lot of heavy reading, not light reading. So.
No, I do all kinds of it. So,
thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate
love being with you.
And I'd like to reserve the right to call you back one day.
Love to come back. SBAM is one of my favorite organizations, so you guys do a great job.
Thank you so much. So we've also got, speaking of the Small Business Association of Michigan, has done a little good work for us also. You released a survey you have about 28,000 small business members, if I'm correct on that. And so you've got a pretty powerful tool in that you can get a lot of data quickly from people who love and respect you for a number of different reasons. Maybe they have their insurance through you. Maybe they just are watching what's happening on the COVID page with you as well. However, it just doesn't matter. You've just got a lot of friends out there in small business. So you've released a survey. Tell me a little bit about what's happened with the results of that survey, Rob.
Generally understanding how they feel about the economy, the economic situation that we find ourselves in, and particularly how they are coping with the changing rules, with sort of opening in stages and phases. This is the second major survey we did of small businesses in Michigan, and just some interesting insights. I mean, on the grimmer side, if you will, 13% of the small businesses surveyed said they were not sure they're going to survive this shutdown. Actually, 2% of them said they are fairly certain they are not going to survive. And 13% really are at risk of simply not making it. Some companies are flourishing right now, so it depends upon obviously the business you're in, but we worry about those companies that are really might have been fragile going into this and really are struggling right now. And I think we don't yet know what the fallout is. 87% of them said they expect a decline in sales, so that's fairly universal, but it does tell us 13% expect sales to be either the same or higher. 22% of those expect their sales to be off by over 50%. So again, those are scary numbers in terms of the impact, the economic impact this is having. You know, as we ask them about their ability to cope, I think there's a tendency to think a lot of work can be done from home, but 52% of them said 0% of their work can be done from home. So thinking about those companies who, you know, many offices and professional services are entirely remote, but you know, if you're a restaurant, a retail store, a lot of other things that remote is simply not an option. So that I think was also enlightening as we think about the impact of this on small business. And then we asked them if they are ready to reopen, or if they are ready to keep their customers and their employees safe. Upon reopening, 90% said we're either already doing it or we are ready. When the green light goes off, we will be ready with PPE, personal protective equipment, the appropriate rules and procedures in place, we're ready. And I think that should give people confidence that they can go back as a customer, go back as an employee into workplaces because our members really believe that they're ready to be safe and secure as a place of business.
Well, thanks for your efforts on that. It is fascinating to hear what's happening. If all of those business losses can survive the year through the taxes, maybe they can carry some of that back or forward and find another stimulus. Thanks to Leon there. I think that there's another a lot of interesting survey results that I'm seeing also about customers and employees. And next week on the show, we're going to be talking to people about, the psychology of that for customers and employees as well. So we look forward to that, and thank you for your work there. I'd be interested to know if you happen to know this just off the top of your head, how many business would not make it normally? So 13% say that they would not. How many in business would go out of business in Michigan? Do you know those numbers?
Well, obviously it depends on the strength of the economy. There's an old saying that for every startup, most startups, if only 20% last 5 years, but starting a business is the most fragile period. So I think in a stronger economy, it's more. In a weaker economy, it's less. But that rule of thumb is 80% of startups don't make it.
Well, I look forward to hearing you keeping your finger on the pulse of that, what's happening. We'll hear more, I'm sure. There's been, speaking of doing business, reopening, Brian, I'd like to have you give us some legislative updates here. I know that there's some things, breaking news with the Court of Appeals. Again, we're shooting this on a Thursday evening for Sunday, so you may have heard some of this, but I think, Brian, you've got a unique perspective because you follow the legislative comings and goings so carefully. So what's going on with the Line 5 pipeline issue?
Well, just a bit of background on that. There has been for a very long time an oil pipeline that runs along the bottom of the Straits of Mackinac, and in recent years, there's been a lot of debate about that and the idea of removing it or replacing it. And because there's so much reliance in terms of overall energy usage on that the pipeline, there was a multi-year long process of review and study on what the best option was. And at the end of 2018, the decision was made to take it out of the lake and instead put it in a dry tunnel 100 feet below the Straits of Mackinac through solid bedrock. And in other words, to completely remove any risk whatsoever of any environmental contamination. And so anyway, that was the decision that was made at that time. And that legislation was challenged largely on technical grounds. The Attorney General was, I think, overall just philosophically opposed to pipelines in general, and therefore was looking for some reason to challenge the law, and came up with a really a very substantially technical argument that the title of the law that was passed in the legislature wasn't quite right, and so that was, we took an interest at the Small Business Association for a couple of reasons. First of all, we care about affordability in energy prices. And so it was, so across the board, individuals and small businesses care a lot about the cost of energy. Without access to that pipeline, it would be very different. Also, it'd be much higher. And then, of course, there's a lot of small oil and gas producers in Michigan that hook up to that pipeline as well. So there were a lot of reasons, but one of the things that we were very concerned about was the claim that the Attorney General was making. One of the claims was that because the act itself, the activities that are made possible because of the act, in other words, installing a tunnel, because that was being done by a private company, it needed to be included, the name of that company needed to be included in the title of the act. And of course, that's silly. There's never been a name of a company put in any act, even though it's very common for the state to contract with vendors to carry out state actions. And this really had us very worried because as we looked at that, what would happen if that argument prevailed? Essentially, what it would be saying is that all government contracting, every single contract that any vendor and small business has to provide goods or services to the state of Michigan, would be illegal unless there was a law passed that included their name, the name of the company, in the title of the act, which of course is absolutely impossible and would never, ever happen. So we actually filed an amicus brief in this case, making the case that the idea of having the vendor's name in the title of the act was just not, it wasn't doable, and it would put at risk all of the different vendor relationships that the state of Michigan has with small businesses. So thankfully, the Court of Appeals found that there was no constitutional problem or problem with the title of the act, that it was properly passed. It was actually a very short and plain decision, strongly worded position, though. I mean, an absolute and unanimous, and therefore, while it can be appealed to the Supreme Court, I think that looking over that decision, we were quite pleased that we think that this is probably the end of the story, that it was a very clear decision, and one that held true to the law and protects vendor relationships of small businesses with the state of Michigan.
Well, that's excellent news. I feel that having a contract with the state can be a double-edged sword, because some strange things can happen there. And sometimes those contracts are so big for us small businesses that it can put you down if something strange happens. Rob, let's finish up with a new downloadable resource on the SBAM website.
We've actually been doing, we're in uncharted territory, and one of the big questions is liability. Literally being sued by customers or employees. New poster you can download from our website about essentially it's a warning to your customers that they will be that you will not be liable. It's basically enter at your own risk kind of a poster. It's got way better language than that, written by lawyers, but you can download it from our website.
Well, I look forward to reading that language. It's less ominous than you put it. Thank you so much for being with me today, and we will see you next Sunday.
For over 20 years, cyber threat actors have threatened the American way of life. They've been attacking us continuously because there are computers to attack. The country is at risk today, not just from the COVID pandemic and social unrest, but from the millions of daily intrusions, these attacks that affect our email, our financial accounts, and everywhere that there's data, threat actors want to steal it. In 2019, Congress commissioned or chartered the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Its role was to make recommendations about what the U.S. government can do, the levers that the government needs to pull to protect us from these cyber attackers. These attacks are on the rise today because of the social unrest and the turmoil in the country. People want to get their lives back to the way they were. They want to go to the restaurants, they want to go to sporting events and vacations, and the attackers don't want that. They want our information. So here's one of the recommendations from this commission report. It was a 184-page report. One of the recommendations had to do with the Internet of Things. Now, it's a weird word, but it refers to all of these devices that are not traditional computing devices that live inside people's homes mostly. It's the Ring doorbell, it's the garage door automatic opener that you can access through the internet. It's the refrigerator, it's the Nest thermostat and light type devices, all the cameras, the baby cameras, that are all of these things that attach to the internet. And if these devices are not designed with security in mind, attackers will be able to get to them. The home network is not have firewalls and protections on it that a normal corporate network would. So where we're at today is millions of people went to work from home. They went into these insecure or unsecure environments, and all around them are these unsecure devices, and the attackers know this. The commission, or the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, has made very strong recommendations for the government to implement both laws and regulations around these types of devices, but also incentives for people to do the right thing, financial incentives. And they've even gone so far as to say in some of these things that have to do with COVID, they could put some money to help get this thing kick-started. So the biggest thing that we need to be aware of today is just the fact that it's happening. Okay, we live in an insecure environment. We have enemies all over the world that want to attack us, and this is a weak place. We are in turmoil from the pandemic. We're in social unrest, and this is a prime opportunity for an attacker. So be aware of it. If you want more information, visit us online at www.makingtecheasy.com.
Focus on Tech, brought to you by Providence, making technology easier.
This is Denise Policella for Focus on Legal. What happens when a pandemic messes with your employee privacy rights? Well, we're about to find out, because over 3,000 complaints have already been filed against employers for violations of OSHA, which requires an employer to provide a safe and hazard-free work environment for its employees. On the other hand, the Americans with Disabilities Act requires an employer to protect the privacy rights of an employee with a disability. And we just don't know yet whether or not COVID-19 is a disability. It's likely that the coronavirus is not. Most short-term illnesses like colds and flus are not disabilities. But until we know whether or not the coronavirus is going to create some long-term chronic side effects that may be disabling, we need to treat it as a disability in the meantime, just to be safe. So what do you do to avoid becoming one of those statistics where you're either sued by your employee for disclosing their illness or by their healthy coworkers for failing to do so? Well, the best thing that you can do for now is sit down and talk to the COVID-19 positive employee about your responsibilities as an employer and business owner for keeping their coworkers safe. Coronavirus isn't very stigmatized and is very widespread, so it's entirely possible that the employee will give you permission to disclose their identity, and then you're okay. But if they don't, you really can't disclose their identity. You just need to make sure that you are informing your customers and employees that you have an employee who tested positive for COVID-19. Make sure that the employee gives you a list of all of their close contacts for the last 14 days so that you can talk to their coworkers about the possibility of their exposure. And then, of course, always consult with a qualified attorney and be safe.
Focus on Law, brought to you by Policella and Associates, PLLC.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next Sunday.